Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. We're going to start in about a minute, so I want to give everyone a chance to sign in, but we will begin quite shortly, and you'll hear silence for a few minutes, and then we will start. Okay, we're going to get started now. I see more people coming on, but we will begin. I want to, first of all, I want to thank all of you who are listening in today on our webinar, You Need Connectivity Now, and Install Your DAS with Advice from CRE Pros. I'd like to introduce our panel today: Jim Whalen from Boston Properties, Nick Stello from Vornado, and Kern Davis from CTS. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. And so what I'd like to do is start with Jim. Jim, what are the most important things that are happening in your world as far as connectivity is concerned in this day and age? What are you most concerned about? What are you most interested in? Is it Wi-Fi 6? Is it DAS? Is it CBRS? What are the considerations, and what are you working towards?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Rich. I think just to get some context here as a way of introduction, obviously Boston Properties is a real estate investment trust. We operate in 5 markets around the country, about 190 buildings, and we range from a CBD 1.5 million square foot building all the way out into the suburbs to a 30,000 square foot building. So, but we, so in that context, when I look, in serving as the CIO and CTO of the company, I look at it from a framework of 3 things when we talk about connectivity. We obviously we run the enterprise, and we run ourselves as a public company and all the connectivity that is required to run our operations. But when we talk about, I think, connectivity in the service of our customers and occupants, it's really the second bucket, which is really around amenities and services, and even the context of a utility in providing connectivity into our buildings. And that ranges from base building, options that come into the building to Wi-Fi in common areas, because again, one of the constructs here is we're a multi-tenanted office owner, and a lot of services stop at the door. Our tenants build out their own space. We don't necessarily we don't really play necessarily in the space other than utilities. And, so you have the option of data and then carrier service that is pretty critical. When you're talking about a Boston Properties building, a Boston Properties portfolio, our customers expect that to be a presence in the building. So that's that second bucket. And then the third bucket is really what I call the IoT of CRE, commercial real estate. So this sheer growth that there's occurring, and this is just talking about the IoT devices that we manage in common areas is on a path like this, let alone what our tenants and our customers are putting into their space and enabling their own space. So it's all that dynamic requires fundamentally connectivity, and right now it's again driven by facility options. It's driven by Wi-Fi, mostly in common areas, and then lastly, or outdoor areas, and then lastly, DAS or carrier service, or having that as a fundamental utility in the entire building. So
Jim, I apologize. I got started. I was so excited to get going. There are some announcements that I should do before we do that. Just please all ask any questions that you'd like to through our GoToWebinar platform. And we will go back to those questions. If we don't get to them today, we will email you back answers. We are recording this today, and we will publish the link to the recording, video and audio in a few days. And today's slides, although they're simple, will be mailed to everybody, emailed to everyone. And if you'd like more information on this topic, you can go to www.cts1.com or connectedremag.com. And so, Jim, that was a good introduction, and I want to get back to what you said. I'm a little uncertain on exactly what you mean by we're doing it in the common areas, but we're not providing connectivity necessarily for our tenants. So our tenants are either on their own, or are you providing things when they ask? So can you break that down for me and how you?
Well, I think I was kind of commenting on it probably from three aspects, Rich. You obviously want data providers in your building, in your asset. So again, a tenant comes in and they pick who they want, or they bring their own data provider, and that's connectivity for their business. The second is Wi-Fi, and again, we don't provide Wi-Fi in our tenant spaces, but we do provide it in common areas. So again, taking up your device and being able to connect. When I'm in a lobby, when I'm outside in a public area, when I'm in a retail area, I want to be able to have connectivity. And then the last is really around that carrier service, and that is a utility that does get provided into our tenant space. Again, we have about 31 million square feet of coverage with the carriers, and we've had a very successful program over the last 10 years, and that's again pretty, for that 31 million square feet is available, whether it be 1, 2, 3, even in some cases 4 carriers are available.
Gotcha. So that makes sense. But what you're saying is you've got everything in the common area, and then carrier grade coverage in most of the spaces that people occupy. Nick, you've got a little bit different take on it from where you sit. Tell us about your view of this coverage issue. What are the things that are important to you? Again, that list I gave before, is it Wi-Fi? Is it CBRS? Is it, just plain vanilla DAS? Talk us through.
Yeah, so thanks, Rich. So, I will have a recurring theme that I do agree with a lot of what Jim said. Boston Properties and Vornado are, two large commercial real estate owners and operators, and we are both always pushing the envelope in terms of technology and amenities. I think, first of all, a few things. First and foremost, the IoT network in our portfolio, Jim, I think your slant was sort of like this. Ours is like this, right? It's really growing exponentially. And, there's a whole team dedicated to that because of the operational value that we can get from a team in-house that, we can have IP cameras and turnstiles and all sorts of tenant access applications. And that's just growing like wildfire. And you need connectivity, you need security from that. Most of those items right now are wired. And I think what, I might have a little bit of a difference of opinion is in the future, and I think a lot of those things could be 5G capable, but 5G isn't a reality right now. CBRS isn't a reality for us right now. But what is our bread and butter happens to be the IoT network. The in-building cell system is an absolute requirement. We're based in New York City. We have just over 22 million square feet thereabouts in New York City and in California, and our tenants are savvy, tech savvy, and they are asking for the best of the best, and we want to provide that, right? So when we're trying to get our properties operating in a very efficient and convenient manner for them, that happens to be the IoT network. But we also want to provide them with coverage for this in elevators, in parking garages, and of course in their property space. And it's equally as important as they're not nice to haves anymore. And lastly, Wi-Fi, we do the same thing. We don't provide Wi-Fi within a tenant space. That's not something we ever have done, and I don't see anything changing in the future. I know there's a lot of digital service companies that can do that, and we too have a large number of carriers and providers in our portfolio. Just like Jim said, we want to give our tenants, a great menu list, if you will, of choices for carriers and options. And we also do the Wi-Fi in the common areas and the plaza and things like that, parts of our lobbies where it makes sense to do. We also, of course, have corporate Wi-Fi for our building management team that helps augment the in-building cellular in certain places.
So Kern, so you're with CTS and you are in a position to come in and help these gentlemen when they have issues, when there are circumstances. So from where you sit, what are the challenges? What are you focusing on? Sort of the same question, but from the flip side.
Well, it's interesting and wonderful at the same time to hear the embracing of DAS everywhere in the building. 3 to 5 years ago, we certainly, because we work for Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile and Sprint all the time, that was probably 80% of our business when we first got started. But 5 years ago, we saw a huge shift in their budget, and we started preaching, that the budget is going to go away from the buildings. They just can't afford to continue to do this. And while there's some exceptions to that, it has pretty much gone away. And so now it's up to the building owners to do it. I think 3 to 5 years ago, that message was a little lost because it was probably the feeling is that it was a convenience for the tenants and the customers to stay connected with family and friends. But the reality, I think, that is being recognized is today, it's our habit to do business on our cell phones. Mobile phones start the majority of phone calls and receive the majority of the phone calls. Landlines don't exist. So that movement has run its course, and it's great to see that that's occurring. By the same token, I also believe that we're going to see the same thing with Wi-Fi, Nick. And the reason for that is that as the demand for all of this bandwidth increases, and you got to kind of understand how it has over the last 5 years as well, that more and more of these services that are being developed are going to require a more robust Wi-Fi network. Those networks will begin to fight with each other between common areas or adjacent offices, as does RF. Everybody can't put their own DAS systems in because they would fight with each other. And I believe that's going to begin to happen with Wi-Fi. So I think the biggest thing is we need to look forward and understand, and that's what CTS can do in their relationship with the mobile network operators, our close-knit relationship with all the OEMs. We don't manufacture anything. We are technology agnostic. So in that relationship, we have a pretty good idea of where it's going and what those problems will be. So yes, we got to be focused on what you need today, and then with some exceptions, we need to also be thinking about what really is going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to slip on you there, Kern.
Yeah, that's all right.
But good points all. But Jim, back to you. So what are the considerations that go into the decision making on all these things? How do you figure out, okay, well, I'm going to do this here. Here's what I want to use over here. Here's how much fiber I need. What are the considerations for you? Again, being one of the, between you and Nick, you guys are probably out there as the thought leaders in this space. And so we look to you for help and understanding here.
So I would, just what I would, going back to Kern's original comment, I mean, the ground has definitely shifted. First of all, there's lots of shifting going on, technology, economics, use cases, so all that is a dynamic that's occurring. But again, 3 to 5 years ago, the carriers, fully funding distributed antenna systems kind of fundamentally changed. So we had to change our model because we're an active developer in all of our markets right now, and really we are now doing different structures to actually ensure that our new developments have it. So that might be, we are still doing some direct carrier engagements. We are co-funding with our tenants DAS. We are paying directly for DAS systems. So so one of the things about the current climate is that and I always say this when every building is different. Every building's kind of make is different, and its attractiveness to carriers, its dynamics, its size, its tenant base. It's all kind of a different profile, and you need to think about or you have to kind of align the strategy per building. So we literally right now, I have 8 or 9 active DAS projects going on. I mean, we're still very active. Some of those are existing assets, some of those are new developments, and each one has a different twist, and some are engaged with different providers and integrators as well as direct carriers to kind of get them done. So again, it's a bit of a management, I wouldn't say challenge, but it's an opportunity for being creative to align again to the profile and the dynamics of a building.
Sounds like a big spreadsheet, if you ask me.
I have a large spreadsheet that has every project that we've completed and going. So I do have a go-to spreadsheet, Rich.
Gotcha.
It's a different mindset, if I may. It's a different mindset. And Jim, you and I entered into this distributed antenna system market years ago, and you're right, 4 or 5 years ago, it changed dramatically. Originally, the carriers were coming to us. We had high entry to barrier Class A properties, and they would be more than happy to fund it. And they were doing so to offload the macro. And they had different matrices and sheets and different types of information on what properties they need to attack and get and to help offload the macro. Now it's a little bit different. And the mindset here has changed, and it needs to change, actually. We were so used to just saying, okay, here's a 2 million square foot property. Let's get that wired up at your cost. And they'd say, yeah, that's great, right? And that might be one of 2 or 3 buildings in a sort of a little portfolio we gave them and they wanted, and they would build it out. And now that's not the case. While most of our large buildings are already covered, which is great, there are still a fair number of other 800,000 smaller sized properties that don't have coverage. And now we're looking at a partnership either with a tenant or trying to get the tenant's national presence, if you will, to work on behalf of themselves and the landlord, us, to get the carrier to help fund it. It's a different environment in which we're working, right? And, having what we had years ago is just not the reality anymore. And sometimes discussing what the actual cost of this technology and these services are to some of the folks in the senior executives here that we never had that conversation before is a different type of conversation to have. And so, while they all realize, which is good, they realize it's a great, I don't want to say amenity anymore, it's a requirement. And what's nice is that they're pushing us to make sure that it's in our buildings. So they're certainly open to a conversation about cost and cost sharing and things like that, but it's still a different type of scenario. And Kern, real quick, I just want to get back to Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi right now for us isn't, in my mind, fundamentally productive or valuable, if you will. I think in the near future with Wi-Fi 6 and perhaps that being a path to 5G, I think that will really change the face of what we have installed in our portfolio for Wi-Fi.
I agreed, and I'm thinking that it's another revenue enhancement potential. I think another service that might be there for you. And the other thing I want to mention too is that as all of this changes, we speak of these almost as different layers within the building, and the more we begin to think about the convergence of all of this and how a converged approach in your building becomes an inexpensive approach today, because boy, that's important, right? I heard that when we were talking about this earlier. So that concept of providing a infrastructure today that treats all of these as just applications that ride on that same network, right. Whether you're extending past that door today or whether you're going to do it tomorrow, let's certainly have that focus on what that ROI has to be today, what that pro forma has to be. But let's look at what solution is going to bring you the most flexibility, scalability, and opportunity over the life of your owning the building, and be that marketable piece when you're ready to sell the building, right?
So,
Yeah.
so Jim, it looks like you had something you wanted to say. Go ahead if you want to add
Oh
something.
no, I was just going to say, coming back to your original question, Rich. I think like for us, I mean, it's about fundamentally about service, like factors, service and for occupants and our customers. It is about cost. There is a cost component here, right? And then coming back to Kern's point, then it's like about future proofing. I mean, in a positioning that is it gives you those options and flexibility down the road. I mean, again, those are inherent in at least our mindset right now as we make decisions. So.
So let me take all three of you back a little bit, 3 years, 4 years ago. So there was a knock on the front door, and it was Verizon or AT&T or both of them, or T-Mobile, whomever. Look, we got a call from one of your tenants, and they're going to move to the other carrier if we don't provide some kind of in-building network for them, because they're very unhappy with their service. And we want to come into your building, we want to build out, and let us in, and we want an exclusive deal with you. And then that kind of spawned, well, maybe we'll put something in that will cover all the carriers or multiple carriers. How did you handle that back in the day, Jim, starting with you? And how do you handle that today in terms of this third-party operator, in terms of this multi-carrier situation?
Yep. So I think, if it was really, and probably not, 5 years ago, it was probably I started 10 years ago. And I think for us, we had, we worked with specifically two major carriers and put a legal framework in place. So we slogged through a legal framework, and that framework then, executed, tens of deals, based, and we're still executing on that format. And so those were, neutral host requirements that had a lot of things from our perspective that governed the ground rules and also protected our tenants' interests in this construct, right? And obviously, things have changed. So, I would say that the carriers participating with one another and joining each other's systems were, it was
Dicey?
Yeah, no. I would say it wasn't a full home run, 100%. So you might have had, 70%. I mean, I still have buildings that have one carrier, and it's a neutral host design, right? So now you've got this dynamic of third parties coming in, and what we have found is when you actually are contributing capital into the build, or putting in, this deal with the tenants, and we're putting in some, and we're funding that. It has been much more successful getting multiple carriers on it. So there's a neutral player, they're not necessarily doing all the funding, and the integrator or the third party is really a facilitator of that process. We've had much more success, getting the third and even fourth carrier on some of these systems. So it's an interesting dynamic, and the carriers didn't, again, 60-70% success, and we're having much more success with a third party. It's just an observation, right?
Yeah.
So
Nick, sort of same scenario. So, carrier A and carrier B came in, and one said, I want to use this kind of equipment. The other one said, I want to use this sort of equipment. And, you'd have to play King Solomon here, or, make sure that they played nice in the sandbox. What was your view of all that? How did you solve it?
Yeah, so we from day one started with neutral host equipment that we knew all carriers would, if they wanted to, could join without much configuration or kicking and screaming. And we had a third-party independent RF resource help us ensure that moving forward, if one of the two major carriers that Jim has in his portfolio, like I have in mine, if one of them built it, we could ensure that the others could join without much trouble. And that's really proven itself out in our model as well. When it comes to tenants, and we've had this in the past where either a tenant had requested a certain carrier, or I wanted a carrier in a property and I had a big tenant in that property, I would help, I'd approach the tenant and help partner with them to get the carrier in and make it good for all of us, because the tenant wins, the landlord wins, and the carrier ultimately makes one of their national customers happy that happens to take a certain amount of space in our portfolio. More recently, though, and to Jim's point, the dynamics of making those agreements like we've done years ago have changed. And now we have a seat at the table where there could be some capital, there could be other types of incentives depending on the venue. And Jim, you're absolutely right. It really depends on the property. The property will drive a lot of the interest from carriers and the venue. And it's just a different dynamic right now where we are now at the table and we had started to look at using third parties to help integrate this. Previously, we were dealing directly with the carriers, and look, we had a good run. I think the capital is not anywhere near where it used to be, and we have to look at other third parties to help us engineer and build it, where it used to fall on one of the two major carriers that were typically building it at the time. And now we have a seat at the table, and there's definitely more interest because we are putting up capital, and it's definitely a different type of engagement these days.
Right. So Kern, you were the guy in most of these situations when the two carriers fought it out, or one said I want vanilla and the other one said I said chocolate, and you came in and you'd have to figure out how to get everybody happy. How did it happen that you were able to then satisfy all these players, sort of in that we got to cut the baby in half sort of situation?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, that was always an interesting seat to sit in. The integrator is kind of the guy who has the job of keeping all the stakeholders happy all the time, and that's not a fun position to be in all the time. And we've done that quite a bit, where we'll see one carrier kind of take the lead on those types of builds, and we have to sit and kind of feed the information back through them and watch how that disseminates out across the others, and then sometimes quietly go back to them and make some corrections.
Right.
Nonetheless,
that's what the integrator's role
that's
really
what our
is.
role. That's what our role
Feed
happens
people
to be, right?
More than anything.
Frankly, what's common to those big types of deals is the fact that they generally move fairly slowly. And sometimes
Amen.
technology will change while it's moving. And so the solution set needs to change. If it takes a year, a lot of universities we've done that way, and big in different verticals where it can take quite a while. And to get everybody, you're trying to get everybody to agree to the same thing. And as you know, that just, especially when it comes to these MNOs, it's a difficult task.
Right. So Jim, I'm sorry, can't Kern.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So Jim, what are the technologies that are coming that are not here yet necessarily, but what are the technologies that are coming that are making you stop and wait? Is there anything that is just troubling you with this stuff, or that's making you say, wait, I got to figure this out before I move forward?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, obviously the big one, is 5G, and just dealing with an in-building, much of what we've installed is going to have to be ripped and replaced to satisfy that. But today, it's all about getting services. I'm not waiting for anything, Rich, because, we have tenants who are looking for, looking for services today. 4G has a long runway, and obviously we want to still make thoughtful investments that's future-proof us when that changes. But literally, there's not really a kind of a like a better word, blessed by 5G indoor in-building solution that is available on the market today. So it's all about being thoughtful, but it's not. None of that is stopping us from meeting our occupants and customers' needs today. So.
Gotcha. So I made a crack on LinkedIn yesterday. Hans Vestberg, the CEO of Verizon, said that a certain amount of the country would have a functional 5G system within 2020. And I made a remark on LinkedIn. That doesn't sound real positive when you say a functional network. It's, a great network, a network that covers a lot, but functioning network, I was a little dicey, I made this crack.
We obviously are in a little bit of a hype cycle with the marketing and but that's just natural, right? But it's gonna take some time here in the next 5 years. So
yeah. Nick, same question to you. Anything making you go, oh, I got to slow down here?
No, but I think Jim should stop all installs in New York City just to make my properties look a little bit better. So that would be appreciated, Jim. But
Yeah.
no, I mean, look, 4G LTE has a long life and it works. And absolutely, tenants come in and we're not going to say, here's an IOU. We'll give you 5G in 2 years or whenever it is. That's impossible, right? So it is a huge hype cycle. And, I just think of going from 3G to 4G, and many of my systems, it's a double-edged sword here, have been, running for 8-9 years, and they started as 3G. And one day I had an email or a call from one of the carriers and said, oh, by the way, we upgraded to 4G. I said, oh, okay, thanks. Okay. That was it, right? And look, all of the carriers have an interest in keeping up with the latest and greatest technology at the appropriate time, as do we. And that's part of our T's and C's and our master contract as well. And I'm being a little bit facetious here. We did have a 4G upgrade, but it was sort of not a big deal. This is completely different. We don't know what 5G is and when it's going to be. And we have to provide today the services that the customers use day in and day out, which is 4G LTE on their devices. So you can't ignore that. What we can do, though, with new systems is hopefully it's not a complete rip and replace. We could add perhaps, fiber to the edge is the big deal. Perhaps plan for higher head density and speak to the OEMs about, okay, if we go with this product, how will that change with 5G and how much pain will it cause me in terms of, just general downtime and monetarily. So those are the conversations we're having, and that's the best we can do right now, but we're not stopping with what's available right now.
So Kern, before I throw it over to you, one of the things that came up recently is in our last magazine, we did a story from one of the OEMs, and the story was called Don't Wait. And, for anybody out there who's thinking and talking about these topics, it's easy to look up on our digital magazine, connectedremag.com, and you can go and read the story called Don't Wait, which I think is terrific, because the conclusion of it was exactly what you guys are saying here. So, Kern, just to run to you, you're the person now that has to talk through, when you get asked the questions about 5G, you get asked the question about CBRS, you get asked the question about Wi-Fi 6. So you have to then break it down for them. How are you handling that with your clients today?
Well, I mean, that is really the biggest piece of what our job has got to be. We really go in more as the consultant than the salesperson. But our understanding of where 5G is today and where it's going to be, it is undoubtedly going to be limited to like a 5 or 6 gigahertz type of signal inside a building, which means antenna densities are going to change. What does CBRS represent? A lot of this is a great alternative to your own or having to work with the Verizons and AT&Ts of the world with CBRS. If they alliance and the networks all agree, the mobile network operators agree to the integration into their core networks. There's a lot that has to be worked out. Again, that is what we have to do as an integrator, is sit down and represent to them our best understanding. And I think we have a great understanding because of our relationship with all the different mobile network operators and the OEM. So what equipment is available that would support it today? Not a lot. Is it being developed? Yes. And when will it be developed? Well, what can we do today? First of all, recognize 5G doesn't eclipse 4G. It's not going to twilight 4G. 4G will continue in earnest for another, who knows, 9 or 10 years. And what is the practicality of thinking about 5G right now? We can't say with 50% confidence what that's going to look like in your building, but we know to some degree, to a good degree, what kind of network infrastructure would probably get you to supporting it with minimum pain later on in life.
Gotcha. So back to you, Jim. One of the key elements of this whole thing, regardless of the new technologies, is having plenty of fiber available in the building. And, kind of that goes to a topic that's sort of near and dear to my heart of this smart building concept. So, how do you view the whole fiber vis-a-vis smart buildings and making sure that
Yeah.
you've got enough that you're future-proofing the building, at least from the fiber side?
Yeah. So I'd say that, we at Boston Properties, we've been kind of a little bit ahead of the curve, I would say. Dating ourselves in the last decade, we have gone, I would call a connected building, right? So, just a comment on smart building. Smart building to me is, a building that is, fully tuning itself and self-commissioning itself. And we are in inning 1 or 2 of that reality. I mean, that's even though that term has been around a long time, I can also say, and Nick can probably file in here, is just making these systems talk to one another and in their current silos is a slog, right? So the whole concept of smart building again. So I talk about connected building, and we have been doing a converged network in our buildings for all our systems. And originally it was for just management, scalability, monitoring, but really in the last 5 years, cyber has come into play. So the protection of these systems in a really thoughtful and comprehensive way has really been facilitated by a converged network of our building systems, whether they be the camera systems, access control, HVAC, lighting, whatever we're doing as an owner to control those assets. So from my perspective, it is, smart building is still very early, but it's more about connected buildings. And we talk at Boston Properties about a network of connected buildings because we run, control centers that monitor 60 buildings, around for example, in the Boston market, we have down in the basement of this building, we can get into any HVAC set point. We can get into any camera. We have, a lot of cameras in Boston. We can get into and open any door, from this location. So that requires connectivity, and it's facilitated by fiber.
Gotcha. Nick, same question, but sort of from the standpoint of being in New York, where you've got a really, I guess Boston might be similar, but you've really got issues in the street in New York. Can you get the fiber you need? Are you loading the buildings up with fiber? And do you see that as the crucial element?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the portfolio that we have in and around Midtown Manhattan, the properties, for the most part, are very big and relatively old. And a lot of them, again, to Jim's point, are connected as opposed to smart. I don't think particularly that you require fiber to create a smart or connected building. It certainly helps. It will be needed in the future. But a lot of our equipment today, some of it requires fiber and a lot of it doesn't. Tomorrow's connected buildings and smart buildings and what we want to do in a throughput will certainly require fiber. And at that point, specifically with renovations, we're doing a large renovation in and around Penn Plaza in Midtown Manhattan, which is across the street from the Garden. And, we have that in the Farley Post Office, which is just behind it. We had meetings not too long ago regarding fiber runs and counts. And when we left the meeting with the general contractor, the folks that are sort of overseeing this for us, we significantly increased the fiber runs because, right now with open walls and ceilings and things like that, the cost to do that is nominal. And we don't know what tomorrow will bring, but if we have to increase the fiber runs because of Wi-Fi 6 or 5G and whatever the case may be, what tomorrow brings, it'll be exponentially more expensive. So look, right now we are putting in fiber where we need it. In terms of new developments, we have more of a standard, but they have, lots of a number of 2 million square foot plus properties in and around New York City that it can be, very cost prohibitive just to have the extra fiber and not have a need for it yet. But going to a point earlier that Jim and I spoke about, we have lots of partners that are carriers, lots of partners that are fiber folks. And, we are exploring portfolio-wide options to bring in more fiber at a price that would make sense for all of us is what I think.
And going back to your original point, you know, I personally, the fiber in the street is there's plenty, especially in CBD. So the fiber in the street is not a constraining factor anymore. Bandwidth is not a constraining factor, especially in CBD. So it's really like as Nick and I were talking about, it's like how do you handle the inside of the building in positioning your asset, right? So
Right. So the advice from you guys would be, you know, deep and high. Take as much in as you can, get it as high up in the building as you can, while the walls are open, if you will, Nick, right?
Certainly.
So Karen, you and I have been in the business long enough that I remember cell sites that had a twisted pair. And when we had to go back and put a second twisted pair on a cell site, it was revolutionary. So today, you know, having fiber to these things and not being able to estimate exactly what we could need in the future. How are you advising clients on what to do with all that? And is there a wireless piece for this backhaul or what we may use in the future to backhaul or to connect these systems? Kern.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were still talking to Nick. Yeah, so you know, we are big advocates now. It's part of our service offerings. The fiber to the edge, fiber rich, fiber deep, is really, we believe, the future proofing of the building or the future consciousness of the building. Smart is, I agree with what both Nick and with Jim are saying, is probably a bad term right now, other than to say it's smart to make sure that you are building something that's going to last the next 20 years, and certainly bandwidth, high speed, low latency is really only going to be answered by fiber.
Gotcha.
So,
Jim,
and the connectivity piece of this is certainly moving more and more toward a wireless connection point. So that means that fiber's got to be spread to more locations around that building. And
gotcha.
that is,
Jim, the question was asked that got back to me just now. CBD, Central Boston District. I'm sorry, I didn't know what that term was.
It's a central business district. I apologize. So central business district versus suburbs. So that, you know, those are.
Gotcha. That's fine.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I just wanted to make sure we cleared that up because someone asked the question through the system. So I guess last sort of topic before we go to more questions would be public safety aspect of this. Jim, you inferred a little bit in Boston, we have a lot of cameras for obvious reasons. How do you view the public safety piece of this from a radio system standpoint in what you're doing? Are you doing anything special, different, unusual?
No, I mean, I would say in you know, we're very active in our development development pipeline, both of what we've delivered and what we're actively doing, and it is still very distinctly kept separate, Rich. There hasn't been, I mean, I know some people have done convergence, but at this point we have, just because of, you know, there's still liability boundaries and some other things that have to kind of be worked out. They are kind of kept separate from that perspective, especially as an owner and operator at this point.
Gotcha. So Nick, you've got a little bit different circumstance in New York with the public safety situation. Your view of it, how is it working for you? Anything different?
Well, no, I mean, it is the same for us, where there is a line between what we are doing in IT and operations. Well, specifically in IT, we haven't really done much with the public safety communications within a building that sort of fell to us or we've opined on. We do have a growing, again, part of the IoT network is security, physical security, tenant security. We have thousands of IP cameras in a command center, and you know that can be a public safety like offering, but it is not the radio dispatch within a building that we've even dipped our toe into that pool yet. We have not at all.
Gotcha. And Kern, obviously, when you're designing these systems, you're talking to them about land mobile radio, about having AT&T in there for the FirstNet coverage and that. So talk us through what the integrator talks about with client companies about public safety.
Public safety is a unique critter at this point in time. It's fairly new. The codes were just introduced in 2009. They get republished on a 3-year cycle between the International Fire Code and the NFPA. It takes some time for those to be adopted, reviewed and adopted at a state level, then at a county level, and then at a city level. And the biggest thing right now is that there's not a lot of training for it, and so the fire marshals may or may not be requiring it or enforcing it in your communities. If they are, there may be some local flavor there that is nothing more than their interpretation of what they think that code means. So you can run into a number of companies like a CTS who know very well how to design and build a distributed antenna system, which is really the solution here for them. But the risk is in do you need it right now? They may say no, or you may not be able to find somebody who can even give you an answer. You may get your building permitted and built, and we've run into this all over the country where when they're trying to get their certificate of occupancy, it is now being enforced, and that a fire marshal walks through and will not issue that certificate, or we may give you a TCO. But so that's the risk, is really getting to that local authority, talking to them about what they are enforcing, what the process is for submitting plans and getting permits for it, and what those costs would be. And don't get me wrong, or understand the differences in one county in Florida from one city to another 15 miles apart, the cost for the same building. Excuse me, for a REIT that was building the same building in two different communities doubled just from the way they were interpreting the code and enforcing the code.
Right, so you're out in California. You're doing a seminar for what are called AHJs, which are what? What is the definition of an
That's the fire
AHJ?
marshal, the authority having jurisdiction. There is a group within the fire department that runs around and inspects building. Undoubtedly, your buildings have received those inspections when they're walking in to make sure that your alarm systems are working, that your sprinkler systems are working, and so forth. Well, those AHJs also have a group that will review plans and give you permits, but you may not know that you need them yet, or they may not be enforcing them. And they may not tell you that when you're actually getting a permit in a given community, because they haven't really reviewed it or been trained for it yet. But by the time a year later, you're asking for that certificate of occupancy, now they do know it, and now they will enforce it. And because the code had been adopted back in the day when you got your permit, they can now enforce it and tell you, sorry, you're not getting your certificate until, and we have had to rush to the rescue of, I'm talking about, big timeshare facilities in resort areas that could not occupy, and it took them another 90 days to get this thing done.
Gotcha.
So that's the big risk.
Yeah,
that's a big risk.
Just no national standard. It varies from place to place. That's good information, good advice. So Jim and Nick, to wrap up on this topic, sort of what people tuned in today for, I think, is to hear from you, advice, suggestions, thoughts. You guys are really, from where I sit, are doing more and leading on these topics. Advice to people listening in today in the real estate business about what you suggest they do and pay attention to.
Yeah, so I think my advice would be obviously recognizing the landscape has shifted. That if you want this service, I'll give an example. We built a residential tower, and early on talking with the team, I was like, well, we would need to kind of put some capital into this, and the team said, okay, well, we'll figure, let's just see how it goes, right? And we have tenants, occupiers come in, and we wound up having a really poor service, and we had to come back and retrofit it. So the thing is that, and we've had, I would say. So I think given modern materials, modern construction, the density of, it's almost like you're going to have issues. So you either need to kind of think about, a model that and then really kind of looking at one or more partners and putting in kind of a legal structure that works for you, and then that helps you expedite these things. And that's kind of the approach we've kind of had to transition to off the carriers a little bit, to execute on smaller buildings and even some larger buildings, that we have to kind of work through, and really for, again, an occupant experience that is expected in a Boston Properties asset.
Gotcha. Nick, same question.
Yeah, so look, the advice that, I give to the folks internally here at Vornado is that we need these systems. And again, moving forward, there is more of a standard, especially on the IoT side of the network. But you really can't build and have a preeminent property location in New York City without having in-building cellular. I don't know how you do that
but I think anywhere, Nick, right?
Well, specifically,
depending on how you want the Class A building,
Don't play the New York City card on us all the time, Nick.
Yeah.
New York City, boys, these folks in New York City, and I'm one of them, they're demanding. So that's a given. And Jim, yeah, I mean, it comes back to the property and the dynamics of the property. To be in that upper tier of property management and ownership, you need to have, again, I don't want to say amenities, but you need to equip your property with these technologies in order to keep up with the Joneses at the very least, but to continue to promote and have that property as a destination, as one that perhaps may be better than the property next door that doesn't have some of the IoT or in-building cellular capabilities. So it's a matter of getting familiar with folks like Kern and helping the landlord understand the environment, what the sort of the do's and don'ts may be. And, Jim and I sort of cut our teeth for the last 10 or so, 12 years. But I know I'm still learning because things are changing, and having somebody come into this today that hasn't had much experience, they don't know what it was prior, but I know a person like Kern and folks like him can be very valuable in order to get the property up and running in an acceptable fashion.
Right, but I just want to say from my standpoint, you two in big cities like Boston and like New York, we have unique circumstances. You guys have done a great job of this, and so that advice is very well taken. So, Kern, I'd like to first of all thank you and CTS for being the sponsor of the webinar today. I think this was really, really great to talk to these folks that are in the CRE business and could tell us firsthand. But thank you to CTS for sponsoring today. But one of the questions that came through was Cloud RAN, XRAN, horizontal fiber in there. How are you viewing all of that, and what's changing, what's going on with this? We didn't even mention that when I asked earlier about what's making you stop, but that's a good one. What's happening with sort of a Cloud RAN strategy, and are you looking at that for your clients? Kern.
Oh, geez. Yeah. So there's a lot of different approaches that are coming to us right now. And we have got a technology group that is investigating in that. I wish I had better answers for you and the group that's in front of us right now. Clearly, but Nick and Jim are very, very versed in all the different options that are coming right now and where they are. And that is number one in understanding, an approach today.
Gotcha.
So I wish I had a better answer. I don't, but I do know that the RAN has been around for a while. It has usually been where we're either distributing it directly from a NOC someplace, or we're bringing radio heads out to the periphery. But there's any number of approaches now that are coming to us that our group is looking at internally, so that we understand them better and then provide that in our consulting approach.
So Jim, one of the other questions that was just popped up was, how do you view the correlation between great coverage and your tenant percentages? In other words, where the building has great coverage, do you find your occupancy is 100%.
Yeah.
If there isn't great coverage, do you see any correlation there?
I don't, and I probably couldn't quantify it, but by story though, when I talked to someone, this is about 6 months ago, someone I know, when they can drive into this building, park their car on the P1 level of the building, go up an escalator, come into a public area, go into a lobby, get on the elevator, go to the 42nd floor, and never lose a phone call with a client, that's a powerful, just expected behavior, and that's what happens here. I'm sitting in the Prudential Tower in Boston, but we've got 8 million square feet in New York, and that happens in any one of the buildings in New York for us. The GM building on Fifth, or any of the buildings we have there too. So but I don't have any direct correlation. So
yeah. So Nick, from your standpoint, you've got sort of the mixed use piece of it, the $300 million or the $800 million apartment, in New York, and you've got, office towers and all that. Are you seeing a correlation there between great coverage and sales of properties, rentals, all of that?
Yeah. So, when it comes to commercial real estate, I too cannot quantify how much per square foot this is bringing in, or what the percentage of occupancy has gone up by, because we have been building cellular. But we've had in the past requests from prospective tenants, either wanting it or asking about it, and it made their decision a lot easier to be part of our portfolio. All right. And when it comes to the residential towers, that having in-building cellular when you're at the high end of the residential market on Central Park South, it's not even, it doesn't matter. It has to be, right? It just has to be.
Don't worry about that 5-star restaurant if your cell phone doesn't work, is your advice, correct?
So, we find it's, and Rich will come back, it's probably not, it's a variable in a decision process, but we never see it as a primary in a leasing process, but it clearly is a factor in differentiating, the portfolio. So
it's somebody it's always much better to have than not.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Nick, I stepped on you there for a second, but I think we get the point. But again, so someone we all know, John Gilbert from Rudin Management and I were talking about, it's almost a year now, and we got to talking about prop tech and this property technology space. And he kind of looked at me and he said, Rich, prop tech without connectivity is going nowhere. It doesn't matter if you've got all the prop tech opportunities and all the prop tech apps in the world if you don't have good connectivity. How do you view that? Are you obviously Boston Properties and Vornado are looking into the prop tech space very deeply. How do you view that?
Yep. Yeah, no. I mean, I totally. I mean, I know John very well. We're co-developing with the Rudin's project in Boston. I mean, in Brooklyn Navy Yard that we're opening this coming month, and that is, connectivity out for this building on the Brooklyn Navy Yard was a critical component, and we have multiple carriers that for facility provide builds. We're doing DAS there. We're doing a very extensive Wi-Fi for the public areas. The building will be lit, and so again, for new developments that we're developing like Dock 72, it is a critical component, not only just for our own connectivity, but for our occupants. And WeWork will be an anchor there. So again, it builds into the whole fabric of how that building has been positioned. So
right.
Completely supportive of what John has said. So
right, Nick, how do you see the prop tech piece? Are you working on investments there and seeing connectivity as critical to that?
Well, more and more applications are mobile based, and kiosks today can give you a QR code that you can use your phone for to do wayfinding, and everything's connectivity. So not to have that with this great word ubiquitous coverage, which had to come up at least once in a conversation about in-building cellular, is silly. So the connectivity is critical in making sure it's hand in hand with PropTech as we see it as well. There's no.
In this has got a token and it's a beacon. It's a lot of different things,
Right.
and so not only for I use this to come into my space every day. It has a token that needs to be refreshed. Once I'm in my space, this device can then serve for presence and awareness. So this connectivity and keeping this is critical, and it might go to wearables, and it already is in wearables, right? So that's a dynamic for space.
So Kern, as the sponsor and as the integrator helping us all get to this point, any advice from where you sit on how you would help commercial real estate folks choose the right options going forward?
Absolutely. And I want to start with thanking Nick and Jim and you, Rich, for facilitating this. I think it's commendable. It's great to see the shift that's occurred. A lot of it has happened to us rather than us happening to it, but whatever we react and we get there. But clearly Jim and Nick and their groups have stayed ahead of it. Not everybody that's a part of this has the prestige to be able to command a Verizon, AT&T, or the big boys to play, even when they're not playing so much with a lot of other people right now. It all starts with really knowing where the industry is today and what things are available, where it is going to go. If you don't have that capability in-house, find somebody to help you. That is where a CTS and their experience with the OEMs, the manufacturers, the service providers is going to bring that education. And then from that education, you can choose, as Jim has said, there are no two buildings alike. The solution has to be tailored to that building, and because there are no two buildings alike, there are no two solutions alike. There is not a one-size-fits-all answer here. So find somebody who has that level of experience. It's going to be an integrator like CTS, if not CTS, and it's got to be that person who can give you the opportunity to make an educated decision. And again, back to not only for what you need today, but gives you an option that allows you to be ready to scale for tomorrow.
Gotcha. Kern, thank you for that. And Jim and Nick, thank you so much. I'm really was pleased to do this with you today, and I appreciate you being on. Thank you all again. And we're out of time now, but thanks for being here. Again, just housekeeping. We will be ready with this to download in a day or so. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.